Hello, my name is Sorensen. Thanks for joining me on this ASMR video as I continue with my album talk series. I thought I'd talk today about one of the oddities in my vinyl record collection. It's an album of militaristic choral songs performed by the Red Army Choir and conducted by Boris Alexandrov. Besides introducing me to some of the giants of popular music, like David Bowie, the Stones and the Beach Boys, as well as classical composers like Beethoven, Vivaldi and Mendelssohn. My mum had a number of random and obscure records that she'd play on a pretty steady rotation while I was growing up. One of those albums was this collection of recordings by the Red Army Choir. I was very young, maybe 8 or 9, when I first heard this album, and it was maybe a year or two before Gorbachev dismantled things and ended the Cold War. But I remember the propaganda was still pretty strong at that point, and we were being told that the Russians were the evil enemy. My first thought was that this was a dangerous thing for my mum to be doing, listening to a smuggled album from behind enemy lines. I had an active imagination, and I watched Cold War and spy movies and TV shows that I probably shouldn't have at that age. The more I heard it though, the more that Western propaganda seemed illogical to me, because it didn't make sense that people who could make such beautiful, emotional, proud and dynamic music could be inherently evil. As I moved into my teenage years and became obsessed with writing and playing music for myself, I developed a passion for writing, recording and experimenting with all sorts of variations of vocal music. I took my primary inspirations from the East and the West, since the Beach Boys inspired my fascination with complex vocal harmony, and the Red Army Choir got me interested in dynamic choral singing. I can't find any date on the cover or the album itself to suggest when this music was recorded or when this copy was pressed. This copy was produced by EMI Records for an English-speaking audience, and it says on the sleeve that it was manufactured in Czechoslovakia, which dissolved as a country in the early 90s. Coupled with the fact I heard my mum play it in the late 80s, this version must have been pressed at some point before the mid-80s. The performance on this recording was conducted by Major General Boris Alexandrov, who led the ensemble from 1946 until he retired in 1987. His heyday with the choir was presumably at some point between these 2 years, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if this recording, and maybe even the pressing, was from the late 60s or 70s. It's also a pretty sturdy bit of vinyl, which usually indicates an earlier pressing. Here's a little information about the founding and early years of the Red Army Choir that I've gleaned from the liner notes of this album. For centuries, Russia has been famed for its legendary wealth of folk dances and songs. Over the past quarter of a century, through their personal appearances and recordings, the Red Army singers, dancers and musicians, also known as the Alexandrov Song and Dance Ensemble, have sung and danced their way into the hearts of millions. The Red Army Ensemble was founded on the 23rd of February 1928 by Major General Alexander Vasilyevich Alexandrov in honour of the opening of the Central Hall of the Red Army in Moscow. Alexander was a well-known music teacher and composer who led the group as its director until 1946, when his son Boris took over. In 1928, the chorus consisted of 8 singers, 10 dancers and 1 accordion player. By the time this album was recorded and released, the Red Army Ensemble totalled more than 300 members. Each one of whom sought wholeheartedly to carry out a pledge made in 1948 on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Alexandrov Ensemble. We promise not to be complacent, but to make constant efforts to attain peaks of excellence in the sphere of a realistic art of song and dance. In 1937, Alexandrov's ensemble made its first appearance in Western Europe at the Paris World Exhibition. The tremendous ovations at the end of the concert were climaxed by the award of the Grand Prix at the exhibition. In June 1941, 2 days after the Nazi assault against Russia, the ensemble was sent to the front. The chorus was divided into 4 groups. 1 was kept in Moscow, and 3 were sent to other forward locations. Since the end of World War II, the Red Army singers, dancers and musicians have continued to travel extensively. It has become a tradition of the chorus to add to its repertoire songs from the nations in which it has travelled. Sadly, the story of the Red Army Choir had a really horrific addition in December 2016 when a Tupolev Tu-154 carrying 64 members of the choir went down after taking off from Sochi, en route for a Christmas celebration with the troops in Syria. Unfortunately, there were no survivors. After 5 weeks, the choir was reformed in time for Defender of the Fatherland celebrations on the 18th of February 2017. Thanks for watching this album talk video about the Red Army Choir, and for making it to the end. If you haven't already, then please subscribe to this channel, and if you feel so inclined, then also hit the like button. If you'd like to hear the Red Army Choir, then might I suggest that you start off with the song Restless Youth, which is my favourite from the album. It's got a great melody and is a fantastic example of male choral singing, with dynamic peaks and troughs. I'll put a link to the song in the description box, and if you like what you hear, then you can take it from there. Thanks.